Okay, hope everybody's having a great morning. Let me see if I can kind of help understand, or at least how I understand frame rate, Papyrus, and basically how Bethesda approached how they approached it. Um, I'm gonna try to explain how lag can happen, um, what it's tied to, what it's not tied to, and see if that can help figure out what the problem might be. Okay, that being said, scripting is tied to frame rate. Frame rate is not tied to scripting. Um, what that means is that when your game is, when you're playing your game, you have some things going on in the background which generates a frame. Let me get the game started here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Hopefully, when it loads, it's not gonna crash on me. I do have this problem with the game now where it's giving me some kind of weird object virtual reference thing. I have no idea what it is, but I'm working on that on this end. So back to what I'm saying. Um, there's certain there's certain things that need to happen in order for you to be able to see what you see on the screen. So basically, what you consider lag, or what we perceive as lag, is when frames are generated and shown less than so many times a second. Let's see if I can turn this down some. So it's not gonna. Okay. All right. So let's just look at the opening screen. I know this isn't like an FMV, which is like a full motion video, but all right, let's get into the game because I'm gonna have my fingers crossed here. I'm not quite sure where I'm at. I'm home plate, so hopefully this will load and not crash. Okay, so you have things that are happening which are generating an image, and that's only a still image. It's like a picture at that moment. And then you have another image generated and another image generated. And these images are flipped. So the like image number 1 is swapped out with image number 2. Image number 2 is swapped out with image number 3. Okay? So in this example here, um, even though it looks like I'm moving around, I'm really not moving. These are a series of still images that are played in sequence based on the direction that I want to go and how fast I actually go. So
Your
you have
eyes.
so you
They're one
have
of my favorite things about you.
so
I
you
wish it
have
was
your
random.
okay, let me pause it. So you have your input system, be it a joystick, a mouse, you have velocity information, things like that. So the game engine is trying to determine how fast am I moving. Am I moving really slow or am I moving quick? And it's calculating offsets, XYZ offsets. Okay, and you can have acceleration, so you can have physics to where you'll start out moving slow. It's like a curve where the XYZ number changes very little and then all of a sudden it changes more and more, which would be like a physics object. Like let's say you drop a ball. At first it moves slow, but then it's going to move until it accelerates until a certain speed, and then that's the speed it's going to stay at until it hits the ground, depending on how high you are. It's the same thing. So the your game engine, no matter what the game is, it doesn't matter. It's generating one frame at a time, just a single frame. Now, some of the older games used what they call vertical blank. So they would do all of their screen changes during a refresh period, because that was the time when nothing was being drawn on the screen, and you have very limited time in order to make all of your changes before it starts drawing again, and that's where the term screen tearing comes in. So, for example, let's say that I'm rendering this screen right here. You notice there's not a lot of tearing when I move. But if I only get half the screen drawn and I move it, it's now going to start drawing it again before it's finished drawing the first frame. And you're going to see a difference between where it tears. You're going to see a difference between, like, let's say it's only done halfway down, then it's going to tear halfway, meaning that the top half of the screen is not going to match the bottom half because it wasn't finished rendering that frame before it started drawing a new frame. So it looked like the top section moved and the bottom section didn't. That's what you call screen tearing. And that's all based on what they call vertical blank. And what that meant is that in rasterization, what they call rasterization, you're drawing from the top left to the top right, and then you're moving down a line, going back across the screen, and you're just zigzagging across the screen from left to right, top to bottom. And then once you reach the bottom, you have to go back to the top and redraw it again. So there's a time difference between when the rasterization hits the bottom to when it goes back to the top, and that's what they call vertical blank. It waits for vertical sync. It waits for the monitor to say, yep, I'm back at the top, I'm ready to draw again. And that's when the older games would actually render their graphics. Now, newer game engines are different. They have threaded rendering, and it's based on a lot of time calculations, and they'll do some more advanced math to say, okay, I can't get you 60 frames a second, so I'm going to have to change how fast I move something or which objects I move. It's a little bit of load balancing depending on the complexities of the engine. So, so now that you know that, it's okay. So now let's get back to rendering one frame a second. So, I mean, not one frame a second, but one frame at a time. So, Fallout 4, the Bethesda engine here, and that includes Oblivion, all those, it's rendering one frame at a time. But it's squeezing, it's flipping these frames quickly. This frame is getting flipped with this frame, this frame, this frame, and this is kind of like what it's like if you were to look at it in slow motion. See, it'd be like frame is rendered, frame is rendered, frame is rendered. So this is what you're calling lag, right? So if you're watching a game and it's doing this when you're trying to move, you go, oh my God, it's lagging. That is because something has bogged the engine down, and we're going to get to that. But like I say, it's not complicated, but there's a lot of little variables to help you understand and to help us isolate what this might be. So if you look at a game moving like this, you go, oh my God, it's lagging. And there's many reasons for that, which I say we'll do this in the next video, but right now I just want to talk about frame rates. So this means that I'm only rendering one frame a second. One frame a second, so it's lagging. That's why you call it 1 FPS. Even though I can do more, I'm just showing you what it looks like. So if you do this, you go, oh, I can render 2 frames a second, but you still see lagging. And what you're looking for is 60 frames a second, or 30 or better. 40 is okay. 60 would be best, but you can't always do that. And like I said, I'll explain that coming up. Okay, so now you know that the game engine is rendering a frame. The way that they did it is, and I'm not sure why, unless it has to do with creating events for timing for Papyrus, so they can use a frame rate for exact timing purposes to generate exact timed events. But there's other ways to do it, so I'm not sure why they did it. So here's what happens. We're going to do this like we generate a frame, and then we need to generate the next frame. So you may have a thread that's working on the next frame, but it's not going to display it. You're still seeing this. And during that time period, you can call it a vertical blank. It's not a vertical blank per se anymore, but we're going to call it that. So during this lull, this resting period, Papyrus is trying to execute scripts. So everybody always thinks that the frame rate is tied to Papyrus, but it's actually reversed. So during this time when nothing is happening between frames, that's when the VM decides I'm going to do scripting. So what Bethesda chose to do was sacrifice scripting time over frame rate time, and therefore you have script lag. So you can still have a good frame rate, but you have script lag. And if you have 10 scripts, so let's say between drawing this frame and then drawing this next frame to show that you're moving, there's 1,000 scripts being executed. There's not enough time between these two frames to execute every single piece, or not a piece, not every single piece, but a piece of each one of those 1,000 scripts. So it doesn't get to all the scripts. Okay, so let's say it doesn't get to all the scripts because it has to go back to rendering a frame. What you're going to see is what they call script lag, because it seems like my script is taking too long to execute because there's not enough time in between those frames to do every single script that is active. That's why if you get a lot of active scripts in the thousands, it'll just start to really script lag out where nothing seems to get done. You can still move around, shoot, do the basic game events, but scripts don't seem to work right. And the engine doesn't like that. It will really start glitching big time. You have characters that'll go down that won't come back up even though they are perfectly healed. You'll have your companion will go down, like they get injured, they'll go down, but they won't heal and come back up. Because they'll stay in a down state because the script couldn't get updated, or it just flat out skipped it. Because I think there's kind of a weird bug where if it gets really bogged, it'll literally just skip the script altogether, or somehow it chokes itself. So the scripting engine is tied to the frame rate. Now this doesn't have anything to do with transfer settlements or anything like that, other than executing the scripts that transfer settlements uses. Because I think what you're experiencing in your game is a lag of a different kind, and we're going to do that. We're going to talk about that in the next video. So let me bring up. Let me see. I want to see. Where is? I may not have it up. I don't know if I have it up or not. I don't see it right off. Let's see if I do. I don't. So let's bring this up real quick, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, let me get my tablet here. Okay, so what you've got is like 1 second. Okay, you got 1 second. And in here, it renders a frame. And then there's a period of nothing happening. It renders another frame, renders another frame, renders another frame. Now this is all happening in a second. And usually you'll kind of want, like 60, 60 frames a second. We'll put FPS here. All right, so you want 60 of these all the way across. Here is the time frame where Papyrus does all of its scripting stuff. This is like scripting stuff. It's in here. Okay? So if you don't have enough time in here and you got a bazillion scripts, like literally just a bazillion of these things, they're not all going to get done before it goes back and renders the next frame and then tries to pick up where it left off on Papyrus scripting. Okay? And then it keeps doing this. So you're seeing yourself move faster frame rate wise than what the scripts are being done, and that's called script lag. This is called script lag right here. Now, frame rates rendering, I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to break it down into 2 more little quick videos. One's going to be called like load order objects and just objects in general. So this is my understanding of how Papyrus works. This right here is dependent on your CPU, okay? Because this is executed at a CPU level. Your actual frames that you're drawn, how fast you can draw them, is based on your GPU plus your CPU, because your CPU has to calculate certain things, move data in and out of your GPU. So this is a combination of two factors, where this is a combination of a single factor. So if you don't have enough cores, or your CPU isn't fast enough, you're gonna see the problem here. Okay, but also if your GPU isn't powerful enough, strong enough, has enough memory, it's constantly moving data in and out of memory, which means your graphics are too high res for what your GPU was designed for. It's doing a lot of memory moves, moving data in and out of memory, and it's trying to calculate a lot of shadows, things like that. If it's not done properly, or if it just can't do it, you're going to see a very slow frame rate. You're going to see a lag here. And then if you see a lag here, that means that these time slices get smaller. They're gonna start collapsing in on itself, which means you have even less papyrus time. And then everything is gonna be kind of janked. And if you think about it, if you have a slow frame rate, you want to have an equally slow papyrus update time, because that way it looks like that scripting is kept in sync with frame rate. So if the frame rate lags because of GPU resources, the GPU is not powerful enough, then it looks like the Papyrus will try to stay in sync with the frame rate. So that kind of makes sense in a way. This way this doesn't crawl and then Papyrus takes off, or people are getting, I don't know, things are happening way in advance of what you're seeing on the screen. So it tried to keep things in sync with what you're seeing. At least that would be my guess as to why they did it the way they did. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and close this one out real quick, and then because I also want to include objects, load order objects, and objects in general, and how that affects frame rate. Right? I can put it in this one, but it's going to be a bit long, and I want to go ahead and make these kind of short, so it's not going to overwhelm you with too much. But just keep in mind, this is when Papyrus executes scripts in between when frames are generated. So script lag doesn't have anything to do with frame rate, although if frame rates are low, script lag doesn't have anything to do with frame rate, but it could be related to frame rate, because it is tied to the time period between the frames. So that's what I meant. Like scripting is tied to frame. Yeah, that's what I meant. I'm sorry, I didn't want to confuse you. That's so early in the morning here. Scripting is tied to frame rate, but frame rate is not tied to scripting. Yeah, sorry about that. That was my bad. But again, you can have a fast frame rate, but you have script lag because you've got the VM is overwhelmed. It can't get all the scripts executed in this time frame. So when you're balancing your game, you have to consider your hardware, which is your CPU. You need to consider this. You also you need to consider how much memory you have, whether things are being rolled in and out of memory. That's going to slow everything down. Your hard drive speed, whether things can be loaded to and from your hard drive quickly. That's why SSDs speed that process up. And you have different types of SSDs. You have those that I think they're like M1, M3, something. They're on a stick, and then you have the regular ones that look like a hard drive. The stick ones are much faster. Those are like almost plugged directly into the bus, as opposed to going through like the USB thing or the SATA ports. Okay, so yeah, so this is this, and this is frame rate and Papyrus. So let me end this real quick, and I'm going to talk about what I think are some misconceptions with load order objects and just objects in general. Okay, so give me a second to get that organized, and I'll pop another one back up for you.